Hi everyone and welcome to today's video. This is a B1 level social studies lesson, and today we're going to be talking about how do we know what we know, or in other words, sources. What are some possible sources of information? So social studies, as we learned in the last video, covers many different fields. So explain each field in your own words and give an example of something that might be studied in that field. So, for example, history is about studying important events from the past. For example, we might think about when, how, and why the US was founded. I won't go through all of these because we covered these in the last video, but see if you can remember the definition and some examples of each of these other fields in the area of social studies. All right, so now we're going to talk about general knowledge. So, are the statements below true or false? And explain why the false statements are false. So, you can go ahead and read through those, take your best guess, and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. All right, so the Rio Grande River is the longest river in the world. I believe that's false because I believe it's the Amazon River that is the longest. U.S. federal elections are held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. That is true. The American Civil War was fought from 1961 to 1965. That is false. It was 1861 to 1865. And Thanksgiving is a holiday celebrated in the United States on the fourth Thursday of November. That is true. All right, on the previous slide, we discussed four statements, but how did you know that the statements were false and where did this knowledge come from? So the person says, I know that the Rio Grande isn't the longest river in the world because I remember reading in a textbook that the Nile, the Amazon, and a few others are longer. I know that Thanksgiving is on the fourth Thursday of November because I've experienced it many times. I love Thanksgiving. Right, so read the text and complete with the missing words. So again, you can pause the video and try this on your own and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. So we get information from different sources. Sources help us learn about events that happened in the past and the people who lived then. For example, we can learn about how people lived in ancient Rome. They also help us learn about things that we cannot find out for ourselves, such as the tallest mountain in the world. So we can put most sources into one or two categories, primary sources or secondary sources. And before we read this, we have a vocabulary word. Perspective, which is a noun, is a view or way of thinking about something. So primary sources are things made by people who saw an event happen. They can be things like diaries, letters, photographs, or videos. These sources can help us know more about what happened, but they only show what one person thought or saw. Secondary sources are created after an event by people who didn't experience it. They use primary sources to write about the event. Examples include textbooks, biographies, and history books. These sources can help us understand events from different perspectives and give us more complete information. So, you are researching the US Civil War and find some sources. Are these sources primary or secondary? And explain your answers. So, letters written by Union soldiers during the war. So, those would be primary sources because the soldiers were actually there, they fought in the war, and they'd be writing about things that they had actually seen. Your social studies textbook would be a secondary source because it would pull its information from other sources. The people that wrote the textbook were probably not there witnessing the events firsthand, unless you're using a very old textbook. So social studies textbook would generally be a secondary source. Okay, an explanation from your social studies teacher. Again, that would be a secondary source because obviously your teacher would not have been there, to witness the Civil War firsthand. Original photo taken during the Civil War, well, this would be a primary source. It actually came from the time taken by a photographer who was there during the time of the Civil War. So, in social studies, we use sources to make sure that the information we have is accurate. And accurate means correct and true, inaccurate means not correct and not true. So, why is it important for information to be accurate? And what might happen if we use inaccurate information? Well, it could cause us to, reach wrong conclusions, not be able to identify the connections between certain things if the information isn't correct and accurate. Okay, reliability and bias. There are often many different sources of information available, and we need to choose which to use. In social studies, we aim to use sources that are reliable and unbiased. Sources that have accurate information that we trust are called reliable sources. Sources that have false information that we cannot trust are called unreliable sources. Sources that have information that supports one view or opinion instead of another view are called biased sources, and sources that show all the information that is available in a fair way are called unbiased sources. So, when researching the US Civil War, a book that is written by well known experts in US history from a nonprofit organization is likely to be reliable and unbiased. However, a comment made by an unknown person on social media is likely to be unreliable and biased. So, again, you're researching the US Civil War. Do you think the sources are reliable or unreliable, biased or unbiased, and why? And here's an example of the kind of answer. You can use this as a model for your answer. She says, I think photographs are reliable because they show what things really looked like. However, they could be biased if the photographer only took photos of things they wanted to show. So take a few moments, see if you have any thoughts about whether these things are reliable, unreliable, biased, or unbiased. And then we'll talk about the answers. And these answers will vary. I can just give you some of my own thoughts. Posters that the government made during the war, um, depends on what the poster is about. Those could be reliable because they were actually made through the war, but during the war, during the time. But they could also be biased depending on which side. The posters made by the Union government would be biased in one way, while those made by the Confederate side, the other side, might be biased in another way. Diaries written by soldiers and civilians during the war. Again, these would probably be somewhat reliable because they were recording the events as they happened. But again, they could be somewhat biased, again, depending on, the person's beliefs, the side that they were, fighting on, or the side that they agree with. So there could be some bias there. Official government documents and military records, I would say those would be reliable and unbiased. I mean, because they would have to report exactly what happened, who was there. Um, Newspaper articles published during the war, probably fairly reliable. Newspapers can be either biased or unbiased, though they, it depends on the quality of the newspaper. Social media posts, probably unreliable and biased. Speeches made by leaders during the war, they would be reliable. Uh, but again, could be biased or unbiased depending on the speaker's point of view. Academic articles written by well known professors, those I would say would be reliable and generally unbiased. And photographs from during the war, we already have the answer here that they're reliable because they show what things really looked like, but they could be biased depending on the photographer's point of view. All right, comparative adjectives. It is often important for us to compare two different sources, and we can use a comparative adjective and than to compare two things. So the Nile is longer than the Rio Grande, an elephant is heavier than a tiger, and I think social studies is more interesting than science. So if you have a one syllable adjective, you can make it comparative by adding er. Older, longer, smarter. Adjectives ending in y, you can drop the y and add ier, so heavier, easier, lazier. And if it's two or more syllables, you would use more plus the adjective more expensive, more helpful, more interesting. Superlative adjectives are used to show extremes, and it's when we make comparison between one thing and many others. So the Missouri is the longest river in the United States. So they're comparing that river to all of the other rivers in the US. The Antarctic blue whale is the heaviest mammal out of all mammals. And social studies is the most interesting subject out of all the school subjects. So again, one syllable adjectives, you form the superlative by adding est, the plus the adjective plus est, so the oldest. And we use the because there can only be one oldest, one longest, one heaviest. So that's why we use the, because there can only be one of those. The longest, the smartest. Adjectives ending in y, again, we use the plus the adjective, drop the y, and add iest. The heaviest, the easiest, the laziest. And two or more syllables, we use the most plus the adjective. The most expensive, the most helpful, the most interesting. All right, so complete the sentences using the correct form of the adjectives in parentheses. So geography is not easy, but I think it's easier than math. The Pacific Ocean is deeper than the Atlantic Ocean. The Great Wall of China is the longest wall in the world. The Sahara Desert is hotter than any desert in the United States. Social studies covers a wide range of topics, but I think history is the most interesting of all. Brazil is the biggest country in South America. Canada is larger than the United States. And Antarctica is the coldest continent on Earth. So we're going to look again at sources. So discuss your reasons, discuss the questions using comparatives and superlatives, and give reasons for your answers. So which is more reliable, a social media or an academic article? Which is more biased, a speech made by a leader or a diary written by a soldier? Which is the most reliable source of all? And which is the most biased source of all? All right, so now we're going to match some of these keywords from the lesson to the definitions. Again, you can pause the video, try these on your own, and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. So a source is E, the place where we get, the place or person we get information from. Primary source would be A, first-hand accounts of something created by people who experienced it. Secondary source is G, accounts of something created later by people who didn't experience it. Perspective is F, a view or way of thinking about something. Accurate is B, correct and true. Reliable is C, containing information we can trust. And biased is D, containing information that supports one view or opinion over others. All right, so think about what we've discussed in this lesson and see if you can answer the questions as kind of a review. Why do we use sources in social studies? Why does it why is it important for sources to be reliable? And why is it important for sources to be unbiased? That brings us to the end of today's video. Please like, subscribe, share, and if you have any questions, leave those for me in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.